Hi folks, welcome to the Minute to Midnight Show. Tony coming to you from New Zealand. With me today I have Leo Hohmann, who is a frequent guest on the show. It's been a little longer than usual between our interviews, but it's good to have you back, Leo.
Yeah, finally good to be back.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I mean, there's always plenty of things to talk about. I said to you off air, you just sent through a new Substack, that thing that come through in my email about transgendered Space Force officer telling the US Air Force cadets using pronouns will lead to winning warfighting strategies. I mean, that's crazy.
Oh, I mean, we live in the age of the age of absurdity.
We do.
Clearly, Tony, and this is proof positive of it. This video has been going around for a few days, I think since Friday or so. But I just got around to writing about it today, where this colonel in the U.S. Space Force was speaking to U.S. Air Force Academy cadets last week, and he told them a bunch of lies, transgender lies, LGBTQ lies, that all of this diversity and inclusion is going to make our U.S. fighting force stronger, not weaker, stronger. As he approached, can you imagine these transgenders in their little skirts going up against the brutal Russian and Chinese army soldiers? I think they'd make quick work of them. But on a bigger note, I think if we really look at this in perspective from 30,000 feet above, it's just very telling as to where our Western society is right now. I mean, we can't even tell the difference between a man and a woman. If a man says he's a woman, he must be a woman. That's the official policy of the U.S. military. And it's going to destroy us, and not just in battle against the Russians, but I think in terms of God's judgment falling upon not just America, but all of the nations that are going along with these lies. America and its allies are basically poking a stick in the eye of God, the Creator Almighty, and expecting to get away with it. I think God is going to use Russia to judge these nations. Now, Russia has its own set of problems, and I'm sure they'll be judged at a later date. But I drew a connection in this article from what we see going on today. And it is a follow-up in a way to my two articles last week, where I talk about the head of NATO, the Secretary General, saying it's a matter of if, not when, Ukraine is allowed to join NATO. And then President Emmanuel Macron of France saying that basically we will do anything to stop Russia from winning the war in Ukraine. So those are two NATO leaders saying that NATO countries are willing to cross any line, any red line that has been laid out by Russia's Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader. He has said he will not accept Ukraine coming into NATO. And he also said last week that any Western forces placed on the ground in Ukraine, any official troop movements into Ukraine, not just, like a few advisors or technical advisors, but actual troop movements into Ukraine by any Western NATO country will be a red line, and he will let the nukes fly. He will nuke us. Now, I guess you could believe him or you could not believe him, but why should we take that risk, right? If you are a sane leader of the United States or any of these other NATO countries, shouldn't you be pushing back against that? Shouldn't you be trying to give Putin some sort of an out? But no, they continue to back him into a corner, saying that NATO will not accept any measure of defeat in Ukraine, which is insane. it's impossible to win that war if you are Ukraine. And if you do win, it's only going to be because Western troops came in to help you. And now we know that that will mean a nuclear exchange. So where are the brains of these people, Tony? Have you been able to figure it out? I can't figure it out.
I don't think
I
they
mean,
have any.
are they that suicidal?
Or are they being driven by an agenda, a whole agenda, maybe depopulation and all that? I mean, I don't know, because it doesn't seem logical. It seems absolutely insane, really, the whole thing. And obviously, Putin's not someone to be trifled with, especially if you're a Russian opposition leader. You wind up in Siberia and then dead. So that's the type of man that Putin is. So why would he, balk at doing what he's saying in terms of nuclear weapons? I mean, the whole thing is just nuts.
100% nuts. I mean, he's shown himself to have incredible patience with the West. He's been telling them since really he took office that Ukraine joining NATO was a non-starter. In 2008, George W. Bush formally invited Ukraine into the NATO alliance at some future date, laid out a timetable basically, and said, if you do this, this, and this, you're welcome to join NATO. So he didn't care about Putin's red line. And it's just ever since then, they've continued to add new countries to NATO. Just under the Biden regime, we've seen Sweden and now Finland and now Sweden join NATO. So as much as the West tries to characterize Putin as the aggressor, he wants to reassemble the old Soviet empire, according to stupid Mike Pence and the rest of the globalist neocon warhawks. That's the talking points that they continuously put out there, that Putin wants to reassemble the old Soviet empire, without ever providing any proof or evidence that that is the case. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that is not the case, but I don't see any evidence to back up that type of a wild claim. But if you look at the map of Europe, you find quite a different story. If you look at the map of showing NATO countries in 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, and at which time, by the way, the first George Bush administration promised Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. Okay. And if that, now you look at the map comparing 1991 to 2024, and it's not Russia who's expanding, it's NATO that's expanding. So this lie about Putin being in charge of an expansionist Russian regime that wants to reassemble the old Soviet empire is completely based on lies. The evidence shows that it is NATO that is expanding, not Russia. And so, Russia has added Crimea and I believe Georgia since 1991. NATO has added just one country after another. I can't even recount them all. All of the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, then you've got Hungary, you've got Poland, they've all joined NATO. And so
some of those were old Soviet bloc countries too. So
that's my point,
yeah.
Right? And so they've all joined NATO. And if you look at the map, Russia's entire eastern flank is now surrounded by NATO. If they add Ukraine, that will complete the total surrounding. And if you put troops and or missiles in those countries, you now have a checkmate on Russia's very existence. So Putin is in no way, shape, or form going to tolerate that. I'm surprised, actually, that he tolerated Finland joining NATO, because Finland has 800 miles of border with Russia. And if you put troops and missiles there, that is a huge check in favor of NATO. But now they want to put Ukraine in. Jens Stoltenberg just last week said it's a matter of when, not if, Ukraine joins NATO. So we are poking that bear in the eye, backing him into a corner, and then blaming the bear for being the one who's the aggressor. This is typical UK, US, just, if I'm reading a book right now, and it's a really good book, Tony. It's actually written by a couple of British guys, and the title of it is, I want to get it right, so I'm going to look it up here. I don't have it in front of me. The title of it is Hidden History: The Secret Origins of the First World War by Jerry Docherty and Jim McGregor. And this book shows how the universally accepted history of World War I places the blame for the war on who?
On Germany.
Germany.
Yeah. Right.
This book sets out to prove in very convincing fashion that it was actually the UK who provoked the start of that war. And as I'm reading it, you can just see the exact same playbook being used today to provoke Russia. The UK took 2 years preparing for this provocation of Germany. King Edward VII, who followed Queen Victoria, he went around to all the Western European countries, France, Belgium, Italy. He went to Russia, and in some of these countries, like Russia and France, were historic enemies of the UK. But he went to these countries and flipped them. He offered them all sorts of goodies to change their position and go against Germany and to ally with the UK. There were public parts of these treaties that were signed, but there were also secret parts. And this was the military sections of the treaties where, the public section just talked about increasing trade and friendly relations, but the secret parts of the deal involved military alliances. And at the same time, they were whipping up the media, which was at that time mostly newspapers, right?
Yeah.
They were whipping up the newspaper sentiments. They owned all the newspaper editors, okay? Yeah. Just like the Washington deep state does today. And they were whipping up all of this anti-German hatred in the British population. They were buying off leaders of these different countries, offering them, control over certain parts. Like for France, they said, well, you can have control over Morocco, in northern France, and we'll give Italy control over some other countries in the Mediterranean. They worked it. They worked it for 2.5 years to get enough opposition to Germany before the final provocation. And sure enough, it all worked. And the reason being was they saw Germany as the up and coming economic power. Germany at that time in the late 1890s was already starting in the early 20th century. was already starting to surpass the UK in terms of economic output and industrial capability and all of that. And so they knew that if the UK knew that if they were going to maintain their empire, they had to go to war with Germany and defeat it. And so it's very similar today, where the U.S. has this fading empire, this fading economic empire, with the petrodollar being supreme, and now it's not so supreme anymore. You've got the BRICS nations rising and saying they're going to have an alternative currency, and you see more countries siding with Russia, even though Russia was singled out as this horrible aggressor when it invaded Ukraine. We unloaded all these economic sanctions on Russia, and instead of destroying Russia's economy, we actually have made it more powerful, more strong, and all these other countries are siding with Russia. It's up to 40 countries, I now think, want to be part of the BRICS coalition. I think it's 9 or 10 that are actually members in BRICS, but another 30 at least have applied for membership in BRICS. So you can see the same thing with China and Russia rising. And so the U.S., seeing its empire starting to wane, is now becoming the aggressor, trying to provoke Russia into, I think, attacking Poland or one of these, Baltic countries, perhaps. But so far, Putin has resisted falling into that trap. And so the West is becoming increasingly desperate, Tony, because Putin will not walk into their trap. He will not invade a NATO country. And so you're going to see the NATO countries, the West, continue to provoke him. They will at some point, I believe, put troops, Western troops, into Ukraine, and that will probably be the final provocation to get Putin to finally lash out and attack a NATO country.
Yeah, well, it's not a pretty picture, is it? Because there's no way you're going to get a war like that without it becoming nuclear, and then all bets are off as to what happens at that point. It just would be a total disaster for everyone. What's
and according to some of the more knowledgeable experts, Russia has 4 times as many nuclear weapons as the West.
Well, I mean, it does.
Russia and China combined, Russia, China, North Korea have 4 times as many nuclear delivery systems as the NATO countries.
The thing is, if anybody from anywhere ends up using any of the larger sized ones, well, some of which are incredibly powerful, you wouldn't need a small percentage of the arsenal they've got to do so much damage that there wouldn't be any recovery from it for whoever's hit. And then, of course, the retaliation from the other side. I mean, there's no way there's a winner.
That's why it's insane.
Yeah.
And Putin even said in his State of the Union address last week that there will be no winner if the West continues with this insane policy.
Well, that's it. And anybody that's got a half a brain should be able to see that that's the only way, that this could end, is a complete disaster for everybody that goes that way, and then everybody even outside those regions, the fallout and so on would affect the entire world.
But David Pine, I don't know if you've ever heard him, but he's one of the foremost experts on EMPs and nuclear weapons. Dr. David Pine, Pyne. He's on Substack. I encourage all your listeners to subscribe to his Substack. He says that Russia and or China could levy what he calls a decapitating strike, nuclear strike, where we wouldn't even have the ability to respond. So, I just don't understand where these so-called leaders are coming from. They have to live in this world as well. I mean, They have families, right, that have to live in this
Yeah.
world. So they're either going to back off at some point, and this is all bluster, and they're going to back off at some point, which I hope they will come to their senses, or they are truly insane and they're going to push it all the way to the end.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's the that side of the picture. What about internally in the US, the division and the politicking at the moment as well? You know, is distracting people with a presidential election coming up that somehow that's going to really change things.
Oh yeah, that is another great topic. You know, to me, politics in the U.S. is all part of the bread and circuses movement.
Yeah.
You know, you've got football, you've got porn, and you've got politics. Football, porn, and politics to keep the locals, the serfs busy and distracted, right?
Yeah.
Throw in video games and concerts and all of that stuff, and you just got a very distracted, confused, and underinformed population. They actually think that one man, Donald J. Trump, is going to turn this ship around and lead America back to prominence and make America great again. That is so deceptive. I don't know about you, Tony, but I just don't see it. I mean, we have 34.5 trillion in national debt. We are now adding $1 trillion to the debt every 3 months.
Yeah, crazy.
I mean, that is way above and beyond the pace of the debt collection up until the last, I think, couple of years. We've been adding $1 trillion every 3 months. That is, it will never be paid back. It is going to destroy this country because at some point it either has to be paid back or you have to blow up the whole system and start over. And I think it's the latter that they have planned.
Yeah, I agree.
Blow it up and start over from scratch with a new currency and a new system of total control over humanity.
Yes. It's really interesting, just from an article that you wrote. Katherine Austin Fitz shreds Trump, you know, and you quoted what she said. She says there's no right versus left. There's no Trump versus Biden. There is a machine in control of a spending machine that is financed with our taxes and debt barred in our names, that is being sold into our pension funds and into our retirement accounts. There is that machine, and that machine to keep balancing the books is implementing a depopulation plan. That is the reality that has to be faced, and changing the president won't matter. So that was in an article of yours.
Absolutely. I invite people to watch that video clip that I put in that article where Katherine Austin Fitz, who is extremely articulate, she's former undersecretary of the U.S. Housing and Urban Development federal agency and a financial type guru. And she says this debt is not ever going to be paid back and that it doesn't matter who's elected. And the bottom line is they have to blow it up because they've got all this debt where it's not just the current debt, Tony, it's what they owe in terms of all of the baby boomers retiring. There's too many people retiring and not enough young people working for the system to continue. Mm-hmm. And so it's not even an option whether it can continue. And you don't even hear Trump talking about these things. You really don't hear any politician talking about these things. They're just talking about the border and the economy generally, and the education system sucks. We need to reform that. No, you can't reform any of this stuff. It is hopelessly infiltrated, hopelessly captured. And let's just look at it for the sake of argument. If you were really going to turn this ship around, if you were serious about it, you're not just a politician with big talking words, you would have to do what? You would have to close down just about every federal agency. and you would have to deport, you'd have to close the border and deport about 25 to 30 million illegals. Who's going to do that?
No.
Who's going to round up 30 million people and deport them? And who's going to have the gonads to shut down all of these rogue federal agencies who are oppressing the people? And they're even armed up with military weapons and millions of rounds of ammunition. I've reported on that. Why are they arming themselves? Why is the U.S. Small Business Administration, arming itself to the teeth? Why is the IRS arming itself to the teeth? Why is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services arming itself to the teeth with military-grade weapons? There can only be one answer to that question. They plan to use those weapons at some point against the American people. And so, U.S. Department of Education, what do we need that for? It was started in 1979. Did people not know how to read and write in this country before 1979? Did we need the Department of Education in Washington?
Well, they need them to indoctrinate people. That's why, because they need them to push what they want, the same narrative, the UN narrative, the whole globalist, world government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so after 40 years of brainwashing, with federal funds running down to the local level, with to the local school districts, with those funds being held as basically extortion, open your bathrooms to transgender, do this and that and the other, or you won't get your federal funding, which a lot of these school districts now have like 40% or more. It's like basically 30 to 40% of their budgets are funded by the federal government. And so they cannot continue to operate all these schools and pay all these teachers and offer all these worthless classes without those federal dollars. So they basically dance to whatever tune the federal bureaucrats send their way, no matter how grotesque. And so that's another agency that needs to be shut down. The IRS needs to be shut down. The ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, needs to be shut down. The FBI needs to be shut down. It's become nothing but a Gestapo, arresting elderly women who pray in front of abortion clinics and sentencing them to like 10 years in prison. This is nothing but an oppressive government. And so any candidate running for president who's not talking seriously about shutting down entire federal agencies and deporting millions of illegals, I don't even want to talk to them. I don't even want to hear them. I hear Trump on one of his giving one of his political rallies, and I immediately turn him off. And then I read about the next day what he talked about, and it's the same old thing. We're going to do this, that, and the other, without saying how he's going to do it, right? And we know from the first term that he was in office that he's not going to take these bold actions that would need to be taken. And I agree, to even do it would bring down the ire of the entire mainstream media. All the other politicians, the Democrats and Republicans, would be against you. I'm not even saying it's possible to do these things. These two things, shut down whole federal agencies and deport millions of illegals. Maybe it's not possible, but if that's the case, then that just proves my point that it's too far gone to bring it back. There's really nothing left to save at this point. You just have to roll with the punches, know that everything's going to implode and at some point collapse, and then pray to God that there's enough pieces left to pick up and start over.
Yeah, it's pretty much inevitable, and I don't think it's just America either. It's basically the whole Western world, but other countries outside of the West are not in a great shape either. I mean, the whole planet really is in disastrous turmoil, and we can see the end result really the one world government, and that's going to be short-lived. We know that as well, before Jesus returns. But really, it's very hard to see any way other than this as the outcome for what's going on. As you say, it's too far gone.
I agree. I mean, unless we see a miracle, and I think it would have to start with a mass movement of repentance.
Yeah.
Unless we see that, as long as we see just people hanging on to these political fantasies about whoever their political messiah is, whether it's Trump or Biden or Michelle Obama or Nikki Haley or whoever they think the next political savior is, and we see people hanging on to those fantasies, then we know the country is going to continue on a downward spiral, because not enough people are really willing to accept the hard truth that there is no political messiah, and we need to cry out to God for a miracle. This is the only chance we have of America surviving as we know it, in my opinion. How about you?
Yeah, well, I agree. I can't see how it can end well. But I mean, apart from Jesus returning, because when you look at what people are saying and doing, and particularly the young generation, because the older people, becoming less of them, and even them, a lot of them are just as brainwashed. But the real young ones have had all this indoctrination for years. They don't know any different. And they think it's normal. All of the stuff that's been thrown down their throats, and the whole transgender thing. I mean, even 10 years ago, you never would have believed that it would be what it is now, and the absolute upside downness of how it is, the whole male and female thing. 10 years ago even, you wouldn't have believed it was possible, and yet that's how far it's gone, and the transhumanism. And we're only at the beginning, and with AI and all of those things, all I can see is our only hope really is God, is Jesus, and there's nothing that I can see turning the whole overall global ship around. But then as individuals, we can still make choices to turn our own lives around, right?
Right. I think that's so true, Tony. Like I've said, the U.S. government has already been conquered. I might even go so far as to say most state governments have been conquered, because, let's face it, they're addicted to federal money as well. But what has not been fully conquered is the spirit of the American people. And I'm sure the same spirit exists in many of the other Western countries. Yeah. I don't know about some of the countries. I think some of the countries, even the spirit of the people has been so beaten down that it is close to conquered, if not fully conquered. They've had, they don't have Second Amendment rights. I was listening to Katie Hobbs the other day, and she's a brilliant communicator and has a talent that I do not have, which is to be very funny while making a point. And she said, the United States of America, is the one place that was founded on the principle of government for the people, by the people, and of the people. And the government, basically is supposed to work for the people, not the other way around. And it's the only place, she said, where if the government refuses to represent the people can put a gun in their face and say, we're done with you. It's that spirit that I see still lives among a great portion, not enough maybe, and certainly not all, but enough Americans still have that. I can't speak for other countries, but a lot of Americans, despite all of the weaknesses in our society, despite the fact that I think the vast majority of people who go to the polls and vote for politicians are uninformed of the real issues, they still have that spirit of independence about them. I'd say about half the country, roughly. The other half is completely sold out to socialism and the idea of, the collectivist mentality. But I think in some of these European countries, it's far more than 50% of the people sold out to socialism.
Well, the point that I tried to make earlier is the longer this goes on, and the more the younger generation that knows no different takes the reins, the more it is going to be that way, because they're pretty much all indoctrinated in the whole socialist framework. And they think that's normal. That they don't know what it was like under, the old Soviet Union, or what it was like under Pol Pot or some of these other communist dictators. They think communism's the answer, and yet no way. And, or being in China.
I would argue that even the older generation is adopted a mentality that at least partially accepts socialism.
Yeah.
Try taking their Social Security check away for 1 month and see what kind of a outcry you get. I know people say, "Oh, they worked for that." They did, but it's still just a direct transfer from the current working class to the retirees. That money did not go into a savings account to be withdrawn upon retirement. That money was long ago spent on frivolous things, and now we don't have there's no savings account for you when you retire. Your money didn't go specifically into your account, that money that was withdrawn from your paycheck all those years. It is a pay-as-you-go socialist system, and most people accept it, never should have accepted it, but they do. And so it goes back to the socialism in this country really goes back to 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, the federal income tax, and I believe it's the 17th Amendment, where they changed the way U.S. senators are elected. Before the 17th Amendment, the state legislatures chose the U.S. senators from every state. After that amendment was approved in 1913, it was direct popular vote. So what does that mean? It gives way more power to the big cities. That's why we have difficulty electing conservative senators in a conservative state like Georgia, because you've got big cities, Atlanta, Columbus, Savannah, that have so many voters, and they're all Democratic now, that they just swamp the polls. And, that wouldn't happen under the old system. And so all of this happened in 1913. And then with Roosevelt, you had the Social Security and all of the other things. So this country was well on its way towards socialism by the 1940s.
Yeah, okay. Well, so Leo, just let our listeners know where they find you online, or, your websites and what they can subscribe to and so on.
Yeah, leohohmann.com. Also on Substack, leohohmann.substack.com. I'm on Twitter at Leo Hohmann, and Telegram. If you search Leo Hohmann, author/journalist, you'll find my Telegram account, public channel. So yeah, I appreciate you, Tony, and getting the word of truth out there.
Yeah, well, thank you again. You definitely write some very good articles and so on, and it's good to have you on the show, at least semi-regularly, and I miss it when we don't do one for a while, so let's try and not leave such a long gap this time.
Sounds good with me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Tony.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And folks, remember our website is aminutetomidnight.com. Please subscribe to us there. And we do run 100% by donations. If anyone wants to help, it's always much appreciated. I want to say thank you to the people that do help. If anyone else wants to, you can donate at aminutetomidnight.com. And the music used I've written, played and recorded. So God bless, stay safe, and God willing we'll be back with another episode in a few days' time.